By the way, this is Black Souls, not Dark Souls, so if you clicked on this expecting something else, then I already have your view and your soul that I will sell as an NFT. I haven't made a video in a while, and I'm sorry for all my subscribers that had to wait for so long, or both of you. I was extremely busy watching music videos of VTubers I don't watch with titles I can't pronounce. But I also played a bunch of RPG Maker games. I have an odd fascination with RPG Maker games, because RPG Maker is a relatively easy engine to use. You often end up with a lot of weird games if you're willing to dig. You also get a lot of garbage, so it's a lot like gambling, except a lot of those games are porn for some reason, so it's like gambling on a brothel on what prostitute you're going to get. But hey, if you're really lucky, you might actually get one that has a personality. I first heard about Black Souls when someone mentioned it on some 4chan thread and it piqued my curiosity. A little bit of research led to this fucking website again. Also, fun fact, if you type Black Soul in the search bar, you'll end up on a bunch of ASMR videos. What a time to be alive. Black Souls is an RPG Maker porn game that is more game than porn. It is still pretty horny, but it shows a surprising amount of restraint to not ruin the whole atmosphere. You can even turn off the porn and you won't even lose that much content. Which is actually what I did during my first playthrough that I can't show because I didn't record it, and also half of my footage is gone because my GPU is a piece of shit! The gameplay goes as such. When in combat, you have an action bar and so does your enemy. And when it's full, you get to act. So you can predict the number of actions you have before your enemy gets to act. The bar recharges faster depending on your speed, making speed a pretty important stat if you don't want to get hit 500 times before you even get to act. You have Mastery and Sorcery. Sorcery is just magic spells, while Mastery is more so physical stuff. I did start as a wizard, but that doesn't mean shit against enemy who two-shot me. So I have to use dodging and parry to win fights reliably. Parry in particular is extremely useful to beat most early enemies, but it doesn't work very well against anything with high accuracy. Dodge has a higher chance of avoiding damage, but it is also not guaranteed. It also makes your bar recharge way faster, so it's not that much of a loss if you do use it and it doesn't work out. So while dodging is pretty useful, I found defending to just be a lot better to survive encounters that outmatch me. I still take damage, but some bosses just really don't give you a choice and I'd rather be safe than dead. But no matter how skilled you are, you're going to need stats at one point. This is still an RPG after all, and how do you get those? Well, when you kill stuff, you get souls. There's two types of souls. Normal souls can be used as both a form of currency and experience that you can use to level up by talking to a bunny. The second type are colored souls. Colored souls permanently increase the stat depending on their color. They can be dropped by normal enemies in the game, and knowing what type of enemies drop what type of soul can be pretty helpful. While I do heavily encourage making your first playthrough blind, here's a few tips that will make playing the game less grindy and painful. 1. You have 4 ring slots. The game fucking hides that, but rings are basically your main equipment alongside your weapon, and ring effects are huge and often define your character's playstyle. 2. It's much better to sell colored souls early on as they are worth a lot of normal souls. After a certain point, it's much better to use the colored souls on yourself once leveling up starts becoming too costly though. When you die, you also drop all of your souls, and respawn in the nearest bonfire. But you won't lose any real progress story-wise. You can pick the souls you've lost before as long as you make it back to where you died, but a boss might be waiting for you and kill you before you can do that. If you die again while your souls are still dropped, the old souls will die. You can also just, save scum, you can save whenever you want. If you've played Dark Souls, I've just wasted your time explaining things you already knew, but I have to look like I know what I'm talking about somehow. With most of the gameplay covered, let's talk about the non-linearity of the game. From the get-go, there's multiple paths you can take, and it is very likely you will end up getting one-shotted by a boss because it's 10 times more powerful than any of the other mobs in the area. So you will take another path, somehow beat a boss, find a roadblock, take another path, get one-shotted, go to the path you skipped before, get one-shotted ad infinitum until you somehow manage to complete most of the areas. That sounds annoying, because it is, but because you can fast travel to any bonfire you lit, it makes backtracking not as tedious as it could be. Figuring out where to go and what to do is part of the game. It is undeniably frustrating when it feels like you're stuck somewhere, but it forces you to explore a little harder to see what you missed. And knowing the entire map like the back of your hand is basically necessary to get the true ending. The main issue with this system is that because bosses do not scale with your power, the difficulty curve ends up being all over the place depending on what path you take, although you can adjust the difficulty yourself if that's an issue for you. Story: you start being asked a few questions by a girl named Alice. What class you start off as, your name, that type of thing. We then wake up in a prison and get freed by Jeanne d'Arc. Oh, I get it. Okay, so I was supposed to die here. Just pretend I died. After we died, we respawn in the Holy Forest, which is our base of operation. From there, you can go wherever you want, as long as you have the power necessary to survive it. The general gist of the story is there's 5 demonic princesses that are turning everyone into monstrosity. Kill them all to save the world. We meet Leaf, who is a fairy that mostly sticks around us for shits and giggles. There's a lot of possible companions, and all of them are more or less optional. So Leaf is basically the only mandatory party member. Party members can be summoned at any point during a fight, but aren't in combat by default. I actually prefer fighting without them, however, in my first playthrough I only used Victoria and Leaf as they were the first 2 I came across, so they ended up being my favorites just because of that. While I was replaying the game, things have also went slightly differently than the last time I played it. For example, I was fighting the behemoth and lost, no big deal, I live and decide to fight other bosses and come back later. But to my surprise, the behemoth was no longer here. Is it a bug? Did I kill it and actually just forget about it? So I go further and see that the behemoth just killed everything in its path, including the demonic princess I was supposed to kill. You can actually live right there and it will still count as if you killed the princess. In my last playthrough, I killed the behemoth and faced the princess directly, and the tower was full of mobs. Actually, now is a good time to talk about bosses. Bosses are combat-wise mostly standard beefy enemies that usually have a second phase where they hit harder. So as I said before, the main story is that there's 5 princesses spreading some kind of mist that turns people into monsters. More often than not, being a twisted version of a fairy tale or an accurate one. Have you read all fairy tales? Those are fucked up. And yeah, I get it, oh, it's fairy tales, but edgy is not a new and original concept, but I think the game manages to make each rendition rather unique. This game actually made me look up a lot of fairy tales I didn't even know existed. As for the princesses, those are Rapunzel, Snow White, the Little Mermaid, Frog Princess, and finally Cinderella, who can only be reached by killing the other 4 princesses. But you know what, maybe Cinderella has a good reason for all of this. Let's listen to what she has to say. Okay, she's a communist. Once you do that, you get a pretty normal ending that says everything has gone back to normal and everybody's happy and you're with your chosen waifu and it's all good now. I've heard there's a bad ending version if you don't get a certain item, but I have never seen them. Now that's the first ending I got, and that's when I started playing Black Souls 2. However, after finishing that game, I realized that I missed a whole lot of stuff on the first game. Thankfully, I was able to breeze through the game when coming back to it by using the fantasy equivalent of a Nuclear Strike and New Game Plus. Even then, I had to replay the game a couple of times to find things that I had missed, because, just like with the Behemoth incident, If you progress too far, things will happen outside of your control and will stop you from getting some stuff that you may need for some endings. One ending requires you to go through the hardest zone in the game. If you get there, you are probably strong enough to wipe most bosses in the game in an instant. After going through a long ass dungeon, you can decide to simp for a god girl that asks you to kill a bunch of what she calls sinners, like that bunny that allows you to level up. She then gives you a broken item that doubles your stats but sets your MP to 0. It doesn't matter because I'm a sorcerer and my staff makes everything cost 0 mana, so it's literally free stats. Then she asks if she can come to the Holy Forest real quick. Of course, being the simp that we are, we comply and she proceeds to kill every fucking one in the forest. Only Leaf seem to still be alive. Confused? Welcome to Black Souls lore. This ending requires some context to be understood. The other truest ending is when you learn nearly everything important. However, it requires you to get every single fairy tale in the game, which is hard as shit, not just because you have to fight most bosses, but because some bosses only show up after you've progressed enough. So you may need to backtrack a bunch, and that's just not fun at all when you don't know where anything is. Anyway, you need to put all of those books into a library where Alice 2.0 resides. Basically, the first Alice knew she was going to die, so she made a replacement to help you. Once you fill up every fairy tale book, you get into another room where you need... Oh. Well, yeah, so you need the fairy tales of your party members. And the only way to get fairy tales is to kill the holders. I hope you didn't get too attached to anyone. This twist hits harder if Liv was your favorite girl, and she was mine at the time of the reveal. But there's a lot of hints throughout the game that Liv is more than she lets on, and since she's the only companion that can't be killed, too many signs pointed at her. She explains that as a goddess, she was pretty bored looking after humans. However, one day she found you, a writer of fairy tales named Grimm, which is your real name. She found your fairy tales so good that she decided to create a whole world dedicated to your fairy tales, although she changed a few details in said books to make them more interesting. And she also made you the protagonist of said world as thanks for letting her find that inspiration, I suppose. I've heard that you are actually more of an amalgamation of every other fairy tales writer, and that's why you have a bunch of souls in you. It's also kind of fitting that her name is Marie-Sue. Now it might just be a weird translation, but considering all stories are twisted versions of fairy tales, and Marie-Sue is a trope that implies a character where the entire world exists for them, it's kind of like a distorted version of that trope, someone that has the world exist for them, and decide to use that power thinking they can do no wrong. Anyway, you get pissed and decide to fight back. She tells you that it's pointless as she's literally a goddess. I have a counter argument. Oh no, she has a second phase. Oh no, she has a first. We then turn back where everyone else is back. After that, it's up to interpretation. Supposedly, you become the new god of the place and just do whatever you want with it. It's not the canon ending anyway. Now, I've skipped a lot of stuff, and even with that spoiler, the game is still worth playing. And a lot of what I said about the story might even be wrong, because a lot of it is just guessing. In conclusion, I really do love this game. It's weird and interesting, and I can't say I was ever truly bored apart from when I had to grind a little or backtrack, but overall, it was a really cool experience that's going to stick with me, and I'd recommend it to anyone that's capable of stomaching some of its slightly more special element. Alright, this is the end of the video, you can leave now. This video was kind of a mess to make, both from an editing standpoint and also when I recorded myself, I spoke way too fast as I was too stubborn to do retakes and I lost a bunch of footage and you know, it wasn't... I think it kind of shows, in all honesty. The video is not really as good as I wish it was, but you know. I'm going to review a bunch of games before I try to go back to reviewing Shiroka because I want my Shiroka reviews to be as good as I can make them. And for that, I need a little bit of experience, you know, actually making videos. So, you know, better script writing, better editing, stuff like that. So, as for those games, I'm going to show it on the screen. I'm too lazy to actually say them. And, you know, I don't have an outro, so take care, I suppose.